Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast. Last week's episode was on Dutch man baby Erik ten Hag, where we asked, is he able to salvage his reputation at Manchester United this season? If you haven't already, be sure to check it out. Welcome back to Heroes and Humans, where today's episode is on Erling Braut Haaland, the superhuman Gen Z footballer who's already been considered as one of the best forwards in European football, aged only 24. In this episode, we'll explore whether a combination of incredible genetics and sporting heritage meant that Haaland was always on an inexorable path to being one of the most prolific goal scorers of his generation. This is the story of a 6'4" goal-scoring phenom and has been touted as a future Ballon d'Or winner. Yet, according to one infamous ex-player turned pundit, Roy Keane, he's little better than a League Two player. Simon, you've got some stats for this apparently League Two player for us.
Well, this so-called League Two player smashed the Premier League goal-scoring record in his first season at City with 36 goals in 35 games, erasing records held by Andy Cole and Alan Shearer. He scored 52 goals in all competitions in 2022-2023. He's one of only three players, with Cole and Ruud van Nistelrooy, to have scored more than 20 in his first two Premier League seasons each. And midway through his second season at City, he'd already scored against every Premier League team. With 63 league goals in 2 seasons, he scored more Premier League goals than entire teams like Barnsley, Blackpool, Huddersfield and Luton ever have.
I thought it was a quite egregious stat, but it was worth putting in there. Poor Luton have only really had one season. But
yeah, apologies to fans of all those clubs, and this bit was written by Mehreen.
It was. Simon, when did you first come across the man mountain that is Erling Haaland?
Well, as somebody who was forced to write about football full-time at the end of the century, I was very familiar with Ulf Haaland. What happens at my age is a player comes along and you think, oh, I remember that guy. I know who he is. And then you realise, no, this is the son. You're remembering the father. So Danny Blind, Daley Blind, Ulf Haaland, and then Erling Haaland, the one who looks like a giant milk bottle or an enormous baby on an overexposed Polaroid photograph. So not his dad, I realised.
I think he's one of the whitest people I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, like he was underpigmented, yeah.
So in the Kylian episode, we talk about how Mbappe grows up in the optimal surroundings, barring the racism, in the suburbs of Paris to develop his talent.
Well, with two parents who are hyper-focused on learning, education and sport.
And on the face of it, that's also true of Erling. Both of his parents are athletes. His extended family are also doing long jumps and playing football.
He has a grandma athlete.
His grandma still holds the local record in his town for being a long jumper.
I wrote a book called Soccernomics with the sports economist Stefan Szymanski.
Big up Soccernomics.
And we did this study, which is the best sports country on earth. If you measure Olympic medals and winning World Cups per capita, guess which country in the world was number one?
I would have said the USA.
Per capita is not bad, but Norway per capita is the best sporting country in the world, partly because they just aced the Winter Olympics.
I was going to say, yeah.
And they were very good at women's football for a while. And it's a tiny country.
We're going to talk a lot about Erling's generation. Obviously, I do enjoy kind of exploiting intergenerational tensions on this podcast because you're like basically a boomer.
I am so not a boomer. I'm Generation X. The generation that everybody forgets, but we do exist. Yeah.
Are you the one that like super successful ones, like Pep Guardiola? You once compared yourself to Pep Guardiola because you're both
Generation X has very few leadership roles.
Okay.
And Pep is one of the few Generation X figures.
You're like middle managers, podcast co-hosts.
Yeah, waiting for the boomers to die, yeah.
Got it. So Haaland, I think, is an archetype for Gen Z. He is into meditation. He loves biohacking. He does a daily cold plunge. He trolls the media. And he's lived most of his young life online. There are excruciating videos of a very young Erling rapping with his bros in a music video when he's 14 years old. Last year, Haaland completed the Gen Z dream and actually became a gaming avatar for a mobile game called Clash of Clans, where his avatar is called the Barbarian King.
Yeah, I think that's pretty appropriate, yeah.
He's also come of age in the era of the superstar footballer, where your personality, your fashion choices, and your FIFA rating are probably more important than they've ever been. And I'll have to do a lot of explaining about what this stuff is to you, Simon. You're already giving me slightly bemused look. And Haaland really leads into this sort of madness of what modern footballer has become. He wears gold chains, silk pajamas to the club, and he loves a viral clip. I think he has an almost intuitive sense of what the internet wants, and he feeds it. However, there's also the other side of him, a small-town Norwegian boy. I can easily imagine Erling Haaland retreating back to a Norwegian life, living as a pig farmer with his great-granddad and uncles, and eating kebab pizzas, which I've also discovered, to my horror, is a real thing. It's literally a pizza with kebab meat on it, and it's his favourite kind of food.
This can't be true.
Anyone wants to send us kebab pizzas, you know where we are.
Yeah.
DM me.
One of the weird things about Haaland is that this brilliant young centre-forward is born in England.
He is. Erling Braut Haaland is born in Leeds.
Which is definitely England.
And that's why his Yorkshire accent is very good. It's almost as good as mine.
What's yours like?
I can do my impression of Erling Haaland doing his impression.
Go on.
There's a great clip of him taking the piss out of his teammates at Man City, one of whom is John Stones. They're asking John where he likes going on holiday. And John says, I like going to the Louvre. The Louvre. That's pretty good.
Is that you doing Haaland doing Stones?
That's me doing Haaland.
Yeah.
Young Erling is born in Leeds in July 2000, where his father, Alfie, has just moved from Leeds to Man City. Man City is going to be the club that Erling will support as a boy, and there are pictures of him at the League Cup final with his dad watching Man City play. He trains in a Balotelli shirt, and he definitely is closer to Man City than any of the other clubs that his father plays for. Erling never actually considered playing for Leeds. That's because he leaves England pretty early on. He's born in Leeds because that's where Alfie has suddenly moved after playing for Nottingham Forest. And at the age of 4, Erling will then be brought up in Norway.
And this is in part because his dad's career has been cut short by injury. Some people argue because Roy Keane tried to kill him, although this is actually somewhat disputed.
I think it's become true because it's been sung in a football song, so it has to be true.
Give us a song.
Haaland, Haaland, Yorkshire-born Norwegian lad. Roy Keane tried to kill his dad. Ha ha ha, Haaland.
That's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty good song. It's worth talking about what kind of player Alfie Haaland is. He wasn't a striker, far from it. I'm going to quote The Guardian's brilliant Simon Hatterton here, who describes Alfie, and I think this is generous, as a workaday defender/midfielder with a face like a pastry, little discernible skill, but a huge heart, which is probably what most of 90s football was like. Alfie himself has also described himself as an average player. I think that's after he realised what kind of son he'd brought into the world. Let's talk about the tackle, which has been the defining moment of his career. And it's worth telling the story because it was the violent culmination of a 4-year feud between Alfie and Roy Keane, who was a defensive midfielder, we'd call them today, and also captain of Manchester United.
Yes, many younger listeners may just think he's a football pundit, but he actually did play football.
It's 1997. Alfie is playing for Leeds against Manchester United. And there is a pretty innocuous moment where Roy Keane falls over in the box. He tries to get a penalty. He doesn't get one. And Alfie stands over Roy Keane, professional hard man, and screams in his face, basically tells him to get up. 4 years later, when Alfie Haaland is now playing for Manchester City, Alfie Haaland's trying to intercept it. And Roy Keane comes in, studs first, and goes straight in above Alfie Haaland's right knee, takes him out to such an extent that he somersaults over. And the commentator's like, oh, bad tackle. I mean, nowadays, you could hear Gary Neville like wincing at that moment, right?
You would definitely be jailed.
Yeah. And the commentator's like, oh, a bit of a mistimed one there for Roy Keane. Roy Keane then stands over Alfie Haaland, who he's just crocked, screams over his face, probably the same obscenities that Alfie said to him. He is then sent off. Later on, when he wrote his autobiography, I'm going to quote Roy Keane here. I'm not going to do the Irish accent just in case he comes for me and my family. But he said, there are plenty of things I regret, and that's not one of them. I'd waited long enough. I effing hit him hard. The ball was there, I think. Take that, you C word. And that was the end, definitively, of the Haaland-Keane feud until Erling comes along.
Yeah, so after this, I think Ulf Haaland never completes another football match. This is in 2001. He retires 2 years later, but he's never played a full match after that. And yet, there's an argument that Keane did not end his career because Keane hit the right knee. Alfie already had a problem with left knee. That's the one he had surgery on that summer. And it's the left knee that does for him. But mind you, the body is a complicated thing. So after meeting Keane, his career is over for whatever reason.
The end of Alfie's career means that young Erling is then brought up in Norway as a boy in the 2000s. And he's raised in the town of Brunner, the lowland southwest of Norway. And some of the details that we know about his early life is from details of a brilliant biography of Erling from Norwegian journalist Lars Sivertsen. So big up to Lars. Lars describes the place where Erling is raised, an area called Jaren, as one where people are shaped by the harshness of the land.
It's a farming region.
It's a farming region, sparsely populated.
So this is the poor end of the richest country in Europe.
Although it's by no means a kind of shabby place. And people from Jaren, he says, kind of have a chip on their shoulder because there's a bit of a stigma in the rest of Norway from being from Jaren. And to quote Lars's book, the stereotype of the region is being stoic, dour, and having an economical way with words. These are some characteristics that Haaland shows, especially, I think, the economical way with words. But in lots of ways, he will also grow up to break so many of the stereotypes of being from Jaren and also being from Norway. Erling grows up as the child or the son of Alfie Haaland, who is a minor local celebrity, and he starts playing football very early in his young life.
So he is sporting on both sides of his family because his mother, Marita Braut, who gave him his middle name, is an elite heptathlete. And his grandmother holds local records for the standing long jump in Brunner, although I imagine she's not still competing in that particular discipline.
She's not still standing.
He has a great uncle who's a kind of local football hero who also played for the national team called Højlund, like the Danish player. And Haaland has told your paper, The Times, there are at least 10 other extended family members who played football professionally.
So he comes from a very solid genetic stock.
He is genetically blessed.
From 8 to 16 years old, young Erling is playing local youth football with players of all levels and abilities in Brunner, in a society where coaches really value the idea of equality of opportunity. They like the fact that all kids of all abilities have to play with each other week in, week out. They think it's character building, and they think it creates a kind of sense in which football is not just a game about winning, it's about taking part.
I suppose if you're Norwegian, it's helpful to think that football is not a game about winning.
And the reason the Norwegians take so much pride in this is because they are run by this very kind of informal but very serious way of thinking about the world, which is something called the laws of Jante, Simon.
Yeah, the laws of Jante, they sort of legally have to be mentioned in any analysis of Scandinavia. It's not just Norway. And they express this very Scandinavian idea that everybody is equal, nobody is better than anyone else, and you shouldn't put on any airs. So your brilliance at football doesn't matter. You're going to play with all the other kids, and you're not going to think that you're special.
Some of my favourite of the 10 laws of Jante are, you are not to think that anyone cares about you, and you are not to think that you can teach us anything. And as we'll discuss a bit later on, Erling breaks a lot of these stereotypes about the laws of Jante, which I think, again, is his sort of Gen Z rebelliousness coming out.
Well, he is a fantastically gifted kid growing up in a society that isn't really geared to recognising people with insane gifts. It's much more a country that's about treating everybody well.
The young Haaland is very good at football, but he's also small and skinny, nothing like the kind of guy that we know now. His coaches have gone on to say that this was a limitation for him, but one where he developed skills, one of which was getting away from defenders, so squirming away from them, and then also becoming very, very fast, running away from them. And so the Erling Haaland that we know now is huge and really fast. It's like almost a trick of the eye when you see him play football because he's so large. He towers over defenders. And in some games, he manages to run at 36 kilometres an hour. By contrast, Kyle Walker, who's probably the fastest player in the Premier League, and his teammate at Man City can run at over 37 kilometres an hour. And Haaland is probably, for a striker, one of the fastest and biggest I've ever seen in my life.
Well, he runs a bit like a horse.
Head down, right? And he uses his arms to charge. And when he's charging at defenders, I mean, it's absolutely petrifying sight.
But the fact that he was small for a long time, it's a massive advantage. The ideal in football is you grow up small, so you have to learn to move the ball on quickly, to avoid the tackle. So small players learn these skills. But then if at the end you then suddenly become really tall, you also have the advantages of the big player. So it's like being Xavi and Tony Adams in one. That's pretty powerful.
Erling's career takes a big jump quite literally at the age of 16 when he finally leaves his hometown and joins Molde, a club which is then coached by Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, perhaps the most famous Norwegian footballer of all time. In his 2 years at Molde, between the ages of 16 and 18, Haaland becomes a man monster. He gains 12 kilograms, mostly of muscle, and he shoots up in height from 186 centimetres to 194 centimetres. Unsurprisingly, while he's at Molde, the club cook, a woman he calls his tante, his aunt, becomes the most important person in his life. He's living away from home and he needs food. His tante describes him eating up to 10,000 calories a day.
So he doesn't just run like a horse, he eats like a horse.
She would have to make him food to take home because he was so hungry. Erling very, very sweetly gives her a shout out when he wins a big award in Norway as one of the sports people of the year. You know, he names her and says, "Thank you for helping me become big and strong." Subsequently, she's become incredibly famous and there are always TV documentary cameras that go to Molde to ask her about what she fed baby Erling. And she cries sometimes and says she misses him so much, which is very, very sweet. And there are versions of the skinny Haaland that you can still see on the internet. So we mentioned that he is in an infamous rap video with his boys, with the Mandem, where he is looking super, super skinny. And he's about 16 or 17 years old. Here is a clip in Norwegian of Erling Haaland rapping with his boys.
Jeg lyng og alle vet det. Jeg han så du kan se på TV. Ser til og med bra ut når jeg spiser. Jeg synes det mye riktigere.
So I'm sure that album went platinum, right?
Yo, he's got hundreds of millions of hits on that, so let's not throw any shade at him.
Give us your Norwegian to English translation.
I've had to rely on Norwegians on the internet for this, but some of the lyrics in that little clip are Erling saying, "Boys, you can stop talking bullshit. Let's talk about world crisis. I think it's much more important. Everyone knows me. I'm the one that people can see on TV. I even look good when I eat," which shows that he has some degree of social consciousness. He wants to talk about world peace. He doesn't want to rap about crap.
But then he says, "I even look good when I eat."
He's eating a lot, so I think it's clearly a big part of his life at this very tender age. Erling's most viral moment actually comes with the under-20s, where he's playing in the World Cup for Norway, and he scores an incredible 9 goals against a very, very poor Honduras team. And there's even some talk that there's match fixing involved, because scoring 9 goals against a singular team, you would think that they were throwing the game, but poor Honduras just didn't know how to handle the man mountain.
He probably quite often scored 9 goals in a game.
At Molde, he scores 4 goals in 17 minutes, and that's technically at the highest level of Norwegian football. Erling does well, but he's very prone to sulking. And he scores a last-minute winner against a local rival when he's at Molde, and he goes absolutely mental. He does these crazy celebrations, all limbs. He's got this very fierce-looking face. And then this reputation about him being un-Norwegian starts spreading.
Because he's trampled on the laws of Jante. He starts to think he's special. That's not what you're supposed to do.
All of the laws of Jante, this sort of informal code that are supposed to be about modesty and self-effacement, a young Erling Haaland shows that he's not so respectful of them. And actually, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is asked about his celebration after that game. He admits himself that Erling is un-Norwegian, which is pretty tough for a young boy to take, I think.
Yeah, it's like the House Committee for Un-Norwegian Affairs. And I suppose Solskjaer is the ultimate Norwegian, because he's this humble guy who was happy being a reserve for 10 years and never asked for
Exactly.
anything.
And this is, as Lars writes in his book, that Solskjaer is the model Jantian man. He's the epitome of humility, so much so that he stayed at a club, Manchester United, because he was happy being the super sub.
Yeah, I can't see Haaland buying that.
In previous episodes, including Jude Bellingham and Kylian Mbappe, Simon, we've spoken about how Manchester United are almost so close to getting someone that could become one of the best players in the world. And this happens again with Erling Haaland, because Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who's at Molde, calls up his former teammates and his former club and says, "Guys, I've got a man mountain. He can score 4 goals in 17 minutes. He's available to you for £4 million. And Manchester United, once again, fumbled the bag.
This is when Mourinho is in charge. So around this time, they could have signed Mbappe, Haaland and Bellingham, which I think might be even stronger than the team United currently have.
I think it might be a little bit stronger than the team United have. It doesn't work out. Solskjaer says that I got in contact with United because we had this talented striker who they should have had. They didn't listen, unfortunately. 4 million, that's all I asked for, but they never signed him. 4 million. Don't ask where he is now.
So we have this kid who is very much a local hero. He's playing nothing football in Norway with people who are not very good at football. He's known as the son of Alfie Haaland, but coaches are not overly impressed with him. Manchester United have rejected him. In the national setup, people question his un-Norwegian temperament, his lack of humility, and see Martin Ødegaard, not Haaland, as the star boy of Norwegian football. So we have this kid stuck in the provinces, but within 2 years, every big club in Europe is going to be chasing him.
Find out how after the break. Are you loving listening to Heroes and Humans every week? Do you hate the wait between our weekly episodes? If so, why not join our official H&H Supporters Club on Patreon? This exclusive community is the place for behind-the-scenes, sneak peeks, Q&A opportunities with me and Simon, and more bonus content. The link is in the episode description and on all our social media bios. This is a reminder that you're listening to the Heroes and Humans of Football podcast with me, Mehreen Khan.
And me, Simon Cooper.
Welcome back. You join us after Manchester United have just failed to take a cheap £4 million punt on this guy called Erling Haaland, who plays for Norwegian legend and Manchester United legend Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. They don't take his advice. And like Jude Bellingham, whose parents carefully curate every step of his career, Alfie, Haaland Sr., takes charge of his young son's footballing journey, and he does so with the help of a super agent, Mino Raiola. Simon, you have some familiarity with Mino?
Yeah, the late Mino, because he died a couple of years ago, aged just 54. He was this very chubby, highly intelligent, I thought very likable Dutch-Italian. So Mino Raiola's family, they immigrated to Holland from Italy, and they started a pizzeria, and they ended up owning a chain of like 11 or 12 pizzerias. When I hung out with Mino in his hometown of Haarlem, he kind of told me that he took the pizzeria and he brought it to football, meaning that their pizzeria was like this old-fashioned Italian restaurant. You come in, you don't order, they sit with you, how are you doing, we know you, you know what I think you already like today, I'll bring you the pizza with the mushrooms. That would be just right for you. And so it was very kind of a personally curated experience in the pizzeria, and they worked all the time. When Mino becomes an agent, he personally curates the experience for every footballer. What does Paul Pogba need? What does Ibrahimovic need? And what does Alfie Haaland need? And Mino didn't have many clients. He had quite a small stable, but he took each of their careers extremely seriously. He made masses of money out of them. Mino would also represent lowly players, because you'd sign a guy at 18 thinking he's going to become a superstar, doesn't become a superstar, but Mino would stick with him. So Mino is exactly the guy you want curating your career, because he doesn't manage many players, and for each of them, he's thinking about the best way to the top.
And Mino and Alfie both realise that the thing that young Erling needs is not the biggest contract and not the biggest wages and not the biggest club in the world. What he needs is somewhere where he can develop very quickly. So the Haalands end up rejecting Juventus, a top Serie A team, and instead choose Salzburg.
Not a top Serie A team. If you can go everywhere, most people would not go to Red Bull Salzburg, but that is where Haaland goes in 2019 to the Austrian League on a 5-year contract for a fee rising to 10 million euros. I mean, it's a very strange first step, except when you start to draw the comparison with Mbappe, with Bellingham, who also come from very sporty families. So Jude Bellingham's father is a non-league star, 700 goals in non-league. Mbappe's father is an amateur coach, and his mother played top-level handball. And so these are very serious sporting families. And what do those families do? They don't go for the big club first. They go for the club where you can grow and develop. So Bellingham goes from Birmingham to Dortmund. Mbappe, his first pro contract is at Monaco because they feel that's the club to break through. Similarly, Haaland starts his journey at Salzburg. And in all three cases, this choice of a club where you get loads of early playing time, it will pay off massively.
Salzburg sell this dream to the Haalands that once he, develops in Austria, he's clearly going to move to the Bundesliga and play for Leipzig. That's the kind of trodden path. This is the path that Benjamin Sesko has taken over the last couple of years. And of course, it appealed really to what Alfie wants from his boy. There's also the key crucial factor that because Salzburg win the Austrian league, they're almost invariably in the Champions League. Erling Haaland is a footballer of a generation where the Champions League is the pinnacle of football. Kylian gets Champions League exposure when he's at PSG
he's at
and
Monaco.
Monaco.
He gets it at Monaco right at the beginning, yeah.
And playing in the Champions League is almost like a cheat code for becoming known to the rest of the footballing world. And Haaland does that very successfully at Salzburg. Erling Haaland is obsessed by the Champions League, so much so that the night before he's going to play his first game in the Champions League in the 2019-2022 season, he sits in his car and he rides around Salzburg playing the totemic Champions League anthem in his car. And we know this story because his captain bumps into him and asks him, Erling, are you just driving around, cruising in your car, playing the Champions League anthem? And he is, because he's hyping himself up. He's so pumped for this moment, the moment when European football is going to discover who Erling Haaland is. And by gosh, they really, really do. In the first half of the first game that he ever plays in the Champions League against poor Belgian side Genk, Erling Haaland scores a hat-trick. He has arrived in European football. The Champions League hype theme thing is working up. I feel like it's like in Eminem, you know, when 8 Mile, when he goes out and he's like, palms are sweaty. You know, he's fully ready to go and destroy someone on the pitch. A first half hat-trick in his first Champions League game. He will end up scoring 8 goals in 6 Champions League appearances that season. He'll end up scoring 17 goals in his first 9 games in the Austrian league.
That's a pretty good return.
I mean,
yeah.
Haaland grows into his new body and he's really kind of embracing the huge man mountain that he's become. And he has a great relationship with Jesse March, who's now managing the Canadian national team, had a little period at Leeds. And he gets to showcase all of those characteristics that we now know him for, including frightening speed, getting his head down and bearing down on defenders like a stallion with a left foot that could make a football explode. It becomes embarrassingly clear very quickly that Haaland is already way too good for the Austrian league. He only lasts 18 months. And instead of going to RB Leipzig, the big brother club, he ends up at Borussia Dortmund in the Bundesliga. And very importantly, Mino Raiola, super agent, has managed to secure a contract which has something called the release clause. And a release clause is just a kind of contractual stipulation which says that if you pay X millions, you get to sit down and negotiate a contract with the Haalands. And that is now becoming very, very common for all elite players. But if your release clause is 150 million, there's only probably one club, PSG, that can trigger it. Haaland is so low that he has about 12 or 13 clubs interested in him, including Manchester United, who come back, Chelsea, PSG, Juventus are still there. But the Haalands decide to go for Borussia Dortmund. And that's partly because Mino has constructed a situation where the Haalands are always in control of their own destiny.
So this is in the January 2020 transfer window. He makes the move to what for him is the biggest big time he's ever experienced, to Dortmund.
It's big time, as we've discussed in previous episodes about Bellingham and Klopp.
Yeah, but this is a guy who, he's 19 at this point, and he's spent almost his whole life playing with people who can't really play football. Now he's arrived in European professional football and he's just rising through the ranks faster than anyone has ever done.
And he's asked a lot, especially by the Norwegian press. Oh, Erling, you've made huge leaps from Molde to Dortmund in the space of a couple of years. Are you ready for this? And he looks very nonplussed and he says, well, Kylian Mbappe is scoring goals in the Champions League and doing things at my age that I should be doing. And that, again, is something that really offends Norwegians because they were like, who is this kid who's comparing himself to Kylian Mbappe? But that's the level where he thinks he's at, and he's completely right.
I know I have referred before to my interview with Kylian Mbappe, but during it I mentioned Haaland. And Mbappe went into this patronising mode and he said, yeah, he's done well.
Little Erling.
He's been quite promising. I shall watch his future career with interest, sort of thing.
You should listen back to our Mbappe episode where we talk about this, I think what will become the enduring rivalry in football for about a decade or so to come. And it starts off very young.
So he arrives at Dortmund and
he does his favourite trick. He scores a hat-trick on his debut. And this time coming off the bench. Dortmund are losing to Augsburg. There's such an inevitability about the fact that Erling Haaland will come on in the second half of the game and win them the game. He does. They end up winning 5-2 and the rest is history. Haaland scores 86 goals in 89 games at Dortmund in a team where he's playing with the likes of Jadon Sancho. Jude Bellingham will join in his last season. And Dortmund are becoming one of the most exciting young teams in world football.
I just want to dwell on this for a moment. You're at a club. Your club has just signed this Norwegian giant baby figure, and you've never heard of him, and he's on the bench. He comes on, and 23 minutes later, he's scored a hat-trick. How would people deal with that emotionally? I
mean, delirium. The fans absolutely love him. We've already mentioned Mbappe, and again, it's the Champions League where Haaland gains, I think, fame and also some degree of notoriety. And I think it's a testament to him that PSG, the great riches of PSG, he manages to get under their skin in a knockout clash where PSG play Dortmund in the 2020 season. Haaland scores and does what's now become super famous, the yogi pose. You must have seen this, right?
No.
You've not seen him do the yogi pose? I mean, this comes from the fact that he loves meditating, but he scores against PSG at home and then he does the pose, right? That's his celebration.
Oh, right. Oh, to me, it looked like it was a kind of zombie movie enactment. I didn't realize it was a yogi pose.
Yogi pose, to people like Simon who don't know what it is, you kind of sit cross-legged and you put both of your hands out and you close your eyes and you sort of, you're kind of meditating. You're in the meditation zone.
I've seen him do something like that, but because to me, he always looks like the monster in a horror movie, I didn't realize that this was meditation. Obviously, I've never meditated in my life, as you can tell from my personality defects. I didn't realize that this was meditational. I thought he was doing some kind of monster act.
No, man. No.
Yeah,
There's even an emoji. Anyway, the yogi pose...
All the semiology of Gen Z is lost on me.
It is. This is why I'm here to help explain. Anyway, the PSG game doesn't end well. Dortmund lose in the second leg. But the thing that does happen is that the PSG players, after they've knocked Dortmund out, all mercilessly mock him by doing the yogi pose on social media. So you have Mbappe and Neymar and all of these guys who play for the prestigious PSG taking the piss out of a 20-year-old guy who, had the audacity to score and celebrate. It's a huge compliment to him that PSG are so rattled by Haaland.
And he is not bothered and he is not humbled. He is not a person who, on receiving a prize, will say, I am humbled to win the Ballon d'Or.
No, at Dortmund, we really get to see the kind of zany parts of Haaland's personality. One, with the yogi pose. He also starts trolling journalists because he's always mad at the match, which means he always has to go and do the press duties afterwards. He gets known for swearing a lot when he's doing his interviews. He's super awkward. He gives one-word answers. I'm getting reminded of your moment with Griezmann when Griezmann wouldn't answer any of your questions. But Haaland does that all the time. He undermines reporters, he embarrasses them, and he becomes a viral sensation. He also has this trick, given that he scores a hat-trick every other week, that he sleeps with his match ball, who then some post-match interviewers refer to as his girlfriend, one of whom says, oh, you're going to be sleeping lonely tonight because you don't have a football. And Haaland just sort of stares and looks at him. And it's just some of the most excruciating things I've ever seen a footballer do. He's almost as bad as Michael Olise, who's just signed for Bayern Munich, who would answer all questions with yes, yes. I think as a journalist, it's completely terrifying. You can hear about Simon's horrifying moments interviewing Griezmann in our Bellingham episode.
The worst interview I have ever done.
But Dortmund realised very quickly that Erling Haaland is a content monster. So they pepper all of their social media accounts with Erling Haaland. One, because he's bloody great at football. Everyone loves him. And he's the centre of attention in European football, not just in the Bundesliga. Everyone is obsessed with this guy who's broken onto the scene called Erling Haaland. He ends up doing a lot of weird shit.
Yeah, I mean, this weird shit, is it because he's gormless, he doesn't understand it's weird, or is it a kind of surreal act?
I think he has such an intuitive sense of what will make him viral that he leans into this so much that he knows exactly what he's doing. I think part of him is that kind of staccato, Norwegian, kind of unceremonious guy from Yaren, which we spoke about at the beginning. And the other part of him is the fact that he just has this native understanding of what the internet wants and he will always give it to them. And Dortmund really help him. One of the worst things I've ever seen in my life is Erling Haaland doing a 9-minute YouTube video with a famous German influencer, fitness influencer, where they're basically doing stretching and talking about the weather and how fast they drive on the Autobahn. And it's just so awkward to watch because he's making odd noises and he doesn't know where to look with this very attractive woman. And, this is the kind of thing that makes Erling Haaland a household name among his own generation of people, which is this kind of late teens, early 20s. And he becomes a cult icon, I think.
So he's self-knowing. He's kind of leaning into his awkwardness and
I think so.
Turning it into a cult act.
Yes. And we spoke about Bellingham, who I think in some ways is such a throwback. He's a classic kind of, people compliment him from the fact that he's such an adult and he's just so mature for his age. Haaland really leans into the not taking himself too seriously kind of thing. Despite being a monster on the pitch where he's super aggressive and he pulls faces, off the pitch, he just looks like somebody who's super dry, very sardonic. And of course, these are all characteristics I hugely appreciate in anyone.
And to me, the only time I've ever seen him not wearing football kit is there's this video where he's in his underpants celebrating, I think, when they win the Champions League.
Yeah, he's literally in his Y fronts.
He looks like the least stylish person I had ever seen in the football industry.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's genuinely your take? You think that he's got terrible fashion sense?
Well, I mean, the kind of Y fronts moment was slightly shocking.
Yeah, it's also very him. He's actually become a style icon in some parts of the world. And by parts of the world, I mean people like GQ magazine who've put him on the front cover. Because he's so tall and very blonde, he could pass for a Scandi model. And he's become, known for wearing like silk pajamas at the club. He dresses in quite a zany, outrageous sort of way, which again is part of him sort of showing his personality. And this is something that footballers do a lot now, more than I can ever remember. Fashion is huge in footballing culture. I'm reminded of watching the French squad every time they come to Clairefontaine, their training ground. It's basically become an international fashion show. And there are cameras waiting to see what the players are wearing. If I had to choose, and you're probably not going to ask me, but I'm going to give it to you unprompted.
Go on.
I think the best dressed footballer in the world right now is Jules Koundé, who plays for Barcelona and the French national team. He has an incredible sense of style. And this is all cool. I remember when Beckham wore a sarong and the whole world had a meltdown for a week.
Yeah, all former footballers were outraged. It was the worst thing they'd seen since
it was
Pearl Harbor.
Such an offence to their masculinity.
But he wasn't a real man.
It's a sign of progress that we don't really care if footballers wear skirts anymore. If anything, we expect footballers to wear skirts.
I mean, Haaland also has this very perfect body for sport in that he is giant and muscular and he's just kind of bigger and stronger than everyone else. And I suppose that he's happy to foreground that's central to his look.
And he's so actually obsessed about his body, like I think a lot of younger people are. And he does something called biohacking. Do you know what biohacking is, Simon?
No, I have not personally engaged in it. What is biohacking?
I would describe it as sort of longevity techniques that people do to make sure that they can stay in peak physical form for as long as possible. I think the biggest champion of biohacking, even though he might not call it that, is Cristiano Ronaldo, who at the age of 39 probably has the metabolic age of a 21-year-old.
Yeah.
He looks incredible. And of course, longevity has worked for him. Haaland, when he arrives in Manchester, has lunch with Patrice Evra, who tells him exactly what Cristiano used to eat, which is basically just fish. And Erling decides, okay, just fish. And then he ends up just eating fish because he wants to be eventually like Cristiano Ronaldo. He's now a grown man and apparently he's only on 6,000 calories a day. And it's all dominated by these sort of high nutrient, high protein things like chicken hearts and liver. And like a good Scandi, he drinks lots and lots of milk. He calls milk his magic potion. And as an assiduous follower of his dietary habits, I can also reveal that he is also a lover of carrots and seems to be increasingly photographed, not with a cigar in his mouth, but with a carrot in his mouth.
Yeah, there's a whole genre of video of Erling Haaland eating carrots, often while hanging out in public or signing autographs for fans. There's one where he's signing for a boy and he has this massive carrot coming out of his mouth.
He's a carrot influencer. I don't know if this means he's going vegan. We need to find out.
Haaland is a completely new type of footballer off the field. He is totally his own thing. He kind of advertises himself as being slightly weird. And he does this with great pride. He's somebody who seems not to adapt at all and to kind of reject footballing archetypes.
Yeah, and I think it's worth actually talking about Martin Ødegaard. And even the way Martin looks, he has perfectly cut hair. It's the right length. He doesn't wear a ponytail or, get a massive blow dry the way Erling does. Erling looks equine almost in the way that
he does look equine,
he lets his luscious locks out. Martin Ødegaard is like a matinee idol, right? He's the boy next door. He is sensible. The way that he presents himself is in that modest, self-effacing manner. The way he carries himself, he's now captain of Arsenal at a very young age.
He's a good boy. He's the Scandinavian ideal.
He's the perfect Norwegian footballer. And I think if we really contrast that with Erling, we kind of understand Erling's unique and special place in Norwegian football.
Erling has no desire, I think, to want to be the good boy. He just thinks, I am the best. Deal with it. I'm going to be whoever I want to be at any moment.
Meanwhile, back at Dortmund, Haaland will get to play against his future club, Manchester City, in 2021. And after that game, you can see Pep Guardiola's Man City players rushing up to him on the pitch. Some of them are Ilkay Gundogan and Kyle Walker, who are basically telling Erling that he needs to come to Manchester City, the club of his father and the team he supported as a young boy. It's clearly his destiny, but Man City end up triggering his release clause. And that's the club that he'll play for, the same club that Alfie Haaland played for.
He signs for City just after Mino dies. So my supposition is that Mino was holding up the deal because he wanted his own big payout. And so the Haaland transfer is blocked and blocks all summer. Poor old Mino dies, and days later, Haaland is signed for City.
For a very, very modest fee, which is his release clause again. So Man City only have to pay the number in his contract, which at that point is 51.5 million, and it goes up with some add-ons. But effectively, Man City signed one of the most promising strikers in European football for a sum that could have risen almost 3 times the amount if we're thinking about the actual market value of Erling Haaland. And Erling at Man City becomes very close to Jack Grealish, who I think in many ways, even though he's a bit older than Erling, is the anti-Haaland. And Jack Grealish is really a sort of throwback, I think, to the 90s, early 2000s English footballer. He loves drinking, he loves partying, he has a kind of salacious private life, and famously was shown a map of the UK and said he didn't recognise what country that was.
Right,
this is how English people think footballers are supposed to be. You compare this to Erling, who cold plunges. When he gets to Man City, he actually buys a bonsai tree for the physio room because he wants the players to sort of nurture something, and he wants to have like a meditating influence when they're all getting their massages. He only eats, as we've mentioned, carrots and very low-fat proteins. Also apparently reads science journals because he wants to find the best way to optimise his sleep routine, and wears blue light glasses after 8 p.m. so he can filter out all of the crap on his screen. He's doing everything, even at his tender age, to make sure that he ends up like a Cristiano Ronaldo at the age of 39. All Jack Grealish is doing is making the most of being a Man City player and living his best life, clubbing, partying, and they often run into each other at 4 a.m. when Jack is coming back from the club and Erling's just about to wake up and go to training. But they are actually the best of friends. Grealish actually admits that Erling tells him that he needs to stop his bad habits, to which Jack, and I'm not going to do the Brummy accent, says, I tell him to shut up and get in his ice bath. But he also admits that, he says, Erling, quote, is the best professional I've ever seen. His mindset is something you won't see again. He does everything, recovers in the gym and gets 10 hours of treatment a day. And the ice baths have basically become like a bit of a recurring meme about how serious Erling Haaland takes his physical health.
I mean, this brings us on to legacy. And this says to me that he's targeting a career like Cristiano's or like Messi's, where you stay brilliant for 20 years.
And why not?
It's also a poignant contrast with his dad, whose playing career was brutally cut short, perhaps by Roy Keane, perhaps not. But maybe if you grew up with a father who was prematurely ended, you want to in some way revenge that. You want that not to be you. You want to make sure that your body survives forever.
Surely the best way to revenge it is just to break Roy Keane's leg.
Don't give him any ideas.
So we've spoken a lot in this episode about nature and nurture. And in some ways, maybe Erling Haaland did have the best of it. He definitely had the nature. So, you know, the blessed genetic code of coming from a family and an extended family who are all athletes.
Even more than the Norwegian average.
And the nurture, I guess you're saying that because Norway is actually a far better place to be a professional athlete than a lot of other countries, given your empirical work, was also not an inhibiting factor for him.
I would say Norway is the best place to be a top-class athlete, whether that's professional or not, because Norwegians do really well in a lot of sports that are barely professional, like, you know, cross-country skiing or orienteering. Norwegians win everything at the Winter Olympics. They're the only country that can match Holland in speed skating. So whatever your sport in Norway, you can play at a local club. Everyone will be nice to you. The changing rooms will be heated properly. Your coach will have a diploma. And some of those people who just are not really hot housed at all and not brought into an elite environment, they become brilliant. And that's what's happened to Erling. So I think in some ways his path is a very Norwegian one. He grew up in the country that, proven by our book Soccernomics, is the best in sport per capita in the world. And without doing any academy, it worked for him. He has now become one of the top 3 players of his early 20s generation.
We should also give him his props for his work ethic and the incredible amount of personal struggle that he has put into making sure that he becomes this footballer, whether it's to avenge his father or just because he knows he's super talented. But he does not just rely on his natural gifts, which are blessed because of the nature and the nurture. There is something in him that means that he's become this monster.
Well, I think also we have to come back to the parallel with his 2 peers in his age group, Jude Bellingham and Kylian Mbappe, which is the superpower that comes from a sporting family that understands how to structure a career, that is not dazzled by money, that is not dazzled by the first big club that comes along, but where they have the patience to start at a club like Salzburg, because you know you need to get playing time at that age. I mean, if Erling Haaland is born into a different family, he probably still ends up near the top of the game. But I think that direct route is a tribute to family choices.
And Alfie is an ever-present in his life. He is, after Mino passes away, now basically looking after young Erling's career. We should also mention that he is probably at a moment in his career when he's been questioned for the first time. So his second season with Man City was not as prolific as his first. It was clear that it would be impossible to probably beat it. But there have been questions about whether actually he just fits in Pep's system and he's a tap-in merchant. And he had a couple of games where he had a goal drought, and suddenly all of these questions about whether he's really great resurface pretty quickly, actually.
I mean, the answer to that is yes, he is great, but he's a great number 9. He's the greatest number 9 of our time.
Because there are no number 9s anymore.
Yeah, and that's the thing about number 9. It's become an outmoded, unnecessary position. And so a team can choose to play with a number 9, as City have for the last couple of years. But the terrifying thing of being a number 9 is that the club can say, well, we don't really want to have a number 9. Most clubs don't. We're going to can that whole thing. Whereas every club has a number 6, every club has centre-backs. You are playing a position, a bit like being a leg spin bowler in cricket, that is non-essential. And so you could totally imagine a City side next year that doesn't have Haaland or another number 9. So he is so good, and I think that's what Guardiola did. Guardiola thought, I can do without a number 9, but you know what? We could get the best number 9 in the world for not much money. So I'll build a system that does have one in it.
Winning a treble in your first season was probably a vindication of that decision too.
Yeah, but I think that when people question Haaland's use for Manchester City, they're really questioning whether a number 9 is essential or even necessary.
One of the questions we traditionally ask in our episodes is, what would our hero be doing if they weren't playing football? We kind of basically answered that.
So what, he'd be playing monsters in horror movies?
Yeah, eating carrots. The carrot would be like his trope. Or I think he'd be living this kind of idyllic life on a farm in Norway. And he'd also be like a longevity influencer. So these people whose professional lives it is to do biohacking and seeing how long they could live. So there's this really famous one called Brian Johnson, who's probably in his 40s and he wants to live forever. The irony is he looks like he's 200 years old, but he's made a lot of money telling people about how many calories they should eat every day. I can definitely see Erling doing that.
So Erling's going to do the eat 10,000 calories a day and live forever thing, the opposite of most longevity influencers.
Exactly. And the question we usually conclude with is, would we like to hang out with Erling Haaland? Simon, given that your tolerance for social awkwardness is probably higher than mine, what are you saying?
It's a firm no from me.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
There's nothing in him as a person that appeals to me. I can't see what we would have to talk about.
You could hang out with Alfie and I'll hang out with Erling.
Yeah, okay. You want to hang out with Erling then?
Yeah, we could practice our accents together.
Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. Next week's episode is the first of a two-parter on Jose Mourinho, a manager who went to the pinnacle of European football using manipulation and lies. Be sure to check it out. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Cooper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.